Hi, welcome back to the workshop. Come on in. Now this little beast is John's 1982 Range Rover with a 3.5 litre petrol V8 in it. And as you can see, it has seen better days. Now when he first bought it, it was all about driving to a trial, doing a bit of off-roading and then driving back home again. And on the way back, having covered it in mud, he'd wash it off in a Ford. And that might explain why there's so much surface rust underneath here. But actually the chassis is in pretty good nick. It looks quite strong. There's not too much corrosion. Where it joins the body though, that's not so good. There's quite a bit of surface rust and actually quite critical rust on there as well, so we might have to deal with that. Also, you can see things like the exhaust here, it's got a big dent in it. The chassis member got loads of dents where he's been dragging it over rocks, and of course that's part of the fun of this whole thing. But I get the sense that now he's a little bit overwhelmed with this, well, retirement project, perhaps because it's been let for so long. Now, he says it drove into his garden about 10 years ago. The TATS disc says 2009, so clearly it's even longer than that. And I think the thing is, when you have this much work to do, it can be a bit daunting, but the best thing to do in this situation is to pop it down to an MOT station, put it through a test, get a massive list of all the things you have to do to get it back on the road, but at least you know where to start. The problem is, this car doesn't actually start, so that is my first job. Well, obviously the first thing I need to do to be able to start the car is to be able to get inside. And clearly the driver's door handle isn't actually operating the lock mechanism, so that's going to have to go onto the list. But luckily I've got long arms. And okay, so the door hinges clearly need a little bit of penetrating fluid to make that work. So I'll get some XCP on there, quick sharp, and get that do its magic. But I'll just try and get this front door open. Okay, so we're in, which is great. These hinges aren't quite so bad, and now I can get to the bonnet release, which doesn't seem to be doing anything. So another job for the list. Now, because our bonnet release isn't working, getting under the bonnet so I can actually check the battery and get this lovely V8 working is going to be a bit of a challenge. Now, thankfully, on cars as old as this, 1982, things are a bit more mechanical and have a bit more access to stuff, particularly because the front grille is missing. Now, theoretically, there should be a couple of bolts, there we go, underneath here, and they actually hold the bonnet catch onto the front of the vehicle. So if I can actually undo those and I can spin those nuts off without spinning the bolts, I could then open the bonnet with that mechanism still attached. It gives me access and just another job to add to the list. Well, we're just, the nut's coming off, but it is spinning a little bit. It's tantalisingly close. What I just do is just grab a screwdriver and just kind of wedge it against the bolt, and that's going to stop it spinning as I try and undo the nut. So basically what's happening is the corrosion on the end of the bolt where the nut hasn't been is just giving me just a little bit of trouble. So close. A little bit of penetrating fluid will do that, I think. Just enough to take the edge off. It's being a little bit fighty, but I think we're getting there, which is good. So close. Okay, look at that. So we've got one off. So just put those down there. Let's try the other side. That's good. Managed to get it without the impact driver. Now, maybe, right, so I can just release the safety catch. We are in. Look at that. Okay, so another job for the list. Bonnet catch, or at least the bonnet stay. Need to attach that to our bonnet. And that's fine for now, but we're in, which is great. So now I can have a look at the battery. It looks relatively new, but definitely not the right one for the vehicle. So I might just quickly just check that with a multimeter, maybe even a battery tester, just to see what we're looking at. Let's have a nice, simple battery analyzer. It's very easy to use. I just basically connect onto the battery terminals. And then I'm just going to check the connection, because obviously I haven't got it so good now. So now it's asking me for the current capacity of the battery. In this case, it is 400 amps. I'm just going to dial that in and then go for test. Charge and retest. And 9.8 volts. So it's not completely dead as a battery, but it's not going to be enough to actually turn over this nice big V8. So clearly, I should do what I'm told. Going to pop it onto recondition. Now I will order the right size battery, but in the meantime I'll leave this on charge. I'm going to turn my attention to the fuel tank. But first, let's have a break and a cup of tea. While I have a tea, I thought I'd go through some of the questions you guys have been asking me. So first up, we have here Stephen McShane, and he emailed us a little question about brake bleeding. So he says, I have bought several self-bleeding kits in the past, all of which have proved unsatisfactory. Eventually, I merely resorted to the tried and tested two-person method. However, there are many times when I need to do it single-handedly. Do you have a go-to piece of kit that you would recommend? Regards, Stephen. Well, actually, it's a very, very good question. Normally, I'd use a Paul, because of course there is always waiting in the aisles when I need to bleed my brakes. But there are a few things out there. I think I'd like to do ultimately a combination of either using a bit of vacuum and a little bit of pressure as well, because obviously when you use the vacuum, sometimes it actually prefers to suck air in from sort of just locally to the nipple rather than actually pulling it all the way through the system. So if you can pressurize the system a little bit and then pull it through, that's a great idea. But what's interesting is we have another little tip actually from Ray J. McNay. He is a Mercedes-Benz repair engineer. He works on heavy trucks. And his top tip is to use one of those pressurized garden sprayers. You take off the nozzle, replace it with a 1/4-inch bit of rubber hose. And by the way he's sort of describing his thing, I think probably he's actually kind of reverse bleeding. So you put it on the nipple, and then you actually then pump that brake fluid back up into the reservoir. So the air is kind of going the way it would like to go normally. And then he's saying that that kind of gets rid of the trickiest issues when it comes to bleeding. So there we go. The next question is from Jean Mayer Boutros Khalil. Now, hello Ed, I hope you are very well. I have a weird problem with my XC90 model 2009. Steering returnability is perfect for the central 75% of the domain, but at acute angle, the power steering tends to carry on rotating the wheel without me touching it. It's a little bit scary. This happens when the vehicle is moving slowly. If I accelerate, returnability improves and the wheel comes back to the straight position. The wheel alignments are within range, please advise. Okay, John, well, if I understand your problem correctly, so basically for the sort of the middle 3/4 of your steering range, everything seems to be fine. But when you get to the sort of last, I suppose, 1/8 on either side, then the steering tends to sort of drag you around. The power steering just keeps on going. Now, if you hadn't mentioned that your geometry is all okay, I would definitely point there first, because it would normally be down to your sort of caster angles. If you imagine sort of like these sort of 2 rods, if you like, going into the floor on either side of your wheels, and that's what your wheels are sort of pivoting on, then essentially the idea is that that means that when you're going forward, your wheels will generally pull straight. So essentially you're driving along, and it will, if you go around a corner and you let go of the steering wheel, it will actually then bring you back into a straight position. Now, if there's anything wrong with your geometry, then that would definitely stop that from happening the right way. For example, if you go backwards, then what happens is effectively that angle then is going the wrong way, so you get dragged to the left or to the right quite quickly. So if that's okay, then it points rather more to the actual power steering system itself. Now what's interesting is at the very edges you have these kind of pressure relief valves, and the idea being that of course then it stops the sort of power steering rack from damaging itself when you're at both ends. So if there's a little bit of grit or dirt in the system, that perhaps could stop them from working properly. So the first thing then would be to try and clear out or flush out your power steering fluid, put in some new stuff, and then see if that makes any difference at all. If that isn't it, then I would also have a look at your wheels and tyres. So if you've got the wrong wheels or the wrong tyres on your vehicle, then that can change the offset, and that can affect the geometry of the vehicle as well. So there's a few things for you to check. Good luck with that. It sounds a little bit scary. Got a question here from Richard Vivash. Have you considered restoring or customising motorbikes as a change of direction? Well, Richard, funny you should ask that question. The whole point of Workshop Diaries is to be doing all kinds of jobs that might happen in the workshop, whether it's boats, planes, bikes, tractors or whatever. So actually, one of the things coming up in the show is this little monkey bike here. Well, it's a kind of monkey bike. It's a monkey bike alike-y, or whatever you want to call that. But basically, we're going to try and get it back on the road. Apparently, it did drive once upon a time. And so, even though it's not quite my size, that will definitely be on the list of things to do. Right, okay, so I've got, I would say, more of a comment than a question here from Ian Knott. Ed, will you stop saying that gearboxes contain a few cogs, because it's not true. Cogs are found in mangles, gears are found in gearboxes. You keep making little slip-ups. Well, fair enough. The clue is in the name, gearbox. It is a box full of gears. But you know what? Sometimes people like to think of them as other things as well. But you're right, I will try and correct myself in the future. So a question here from Tim. We have an unrestored Alvis still registered with the DVLA, but in need of some TLC to get it on the road. Be a great episode as it needs some new leather, an engine overhaul, and it needs the suspension checked as well, and a little bit of a touch-up. What do I think? Well, actually, as it happens, we've actually got a 1962 TD21 Alvis in the workshop already, and we've got quite a few interesting engine jobs to do on that, and a couple of little bits and pieces as well. And it does definitely also need some TLC, so you never know. Maybe you'll get some top tips from that, and maybe we can compare notes. Got a question here from Andy Seymour. Hi Ed, I don't suppose you could offer my son James Seymour some help and advice. He's got to make an autonomous 4x4 as part of his masters. Any experience or help would be very welcome. Well, Andy, it would seem that James has quite a challenge ahead of him, but actually it's a very timely project, of course, because everybody wants to have their vehicles in some form of autonomy. So if you think about the technology that's actually being used, you've got radar and LiDAR, all this kind of expensive stuff, but also you have a slightly cheaper solution with cameras. People like Tesla are using that a lot. So effectively you use a cheap camera to actually have you the image, just like we would use our eyes, but then you have clever software to interpret all the objects within that image. I've got a friend in Utah called Mel, and he has a company called Autonomous Solutions. And some time ago, he had to go through a competition for basically a solution to try and get a load of vehicles through some very difficult terrain. Now, a lot of the competition were using all kinds of expensive technology that kept breaking and falling over. And his solution was just genius. It was basically a cord that would go from one vehicle to the next one in front. And then you could have this big snake of vehicles, and they would find their way through that land with no problems at all, very, very simply, just with some clever maths, some clever sensors, and a lot of algorithms going on. I guess my main bit of advice is to keep it simple. Think about nature's solutions. They're very elegant, very simple, and very effective. So do keep your design as simple as possible. But I'd be really interested to see how you get on, and if I can help in any way, please do let me know. Now, this isn't really a question or a comment, it's just a whole load of pictures. So Georgie has actually sent us pictures of his camper van project. I think that's what it is. It's like a little Luton sort of thing. It looks like there's an awful lot of work to do, it's got to be said. It rather like our 1982 Range Rover project, it may well go on and on and on, because I can see there's all kinds of elements you're going to have to deal with. But that's where the fun is, which is great. So please do keep sending us pictures of your progress, and maybe we can answer a couple of questions if you get stuck along the way. Right, back to the Range Rover and that fuel tank. Now, the reason I'm interested in the fuel tank before we try and start this car is because when you think about it, this car has been standing for about, I don't know, over 10 years or so. And that means the fuel inside the tank has also been sitting there all that time. And the problem is, over time, all the aromatics of the fuel kind of tend to break down, and you end up, all that goodness, all the kind of the octane, if you like, that you're going to be burning, just kind of goes off. It gets stale. But also, all those different seasons and changing, the warm and the cold temperature, any moisture that might be in the air inside the tank can also condense because of the metal being so cold, and then that will then run down into the bottom of the tank as well. So of course you end up with water and fuel and stale fuel. So really, to give the car the best chance of starting, I think the clever thing to do is to drain out all the old fuel and put in some fresh new stuff. But also, while we're here, you can see there's this lovely sort of red oxide just down the side here. So obviously John's lavished some love and attention to this, and it might be even a newish tank. So hopefully, just with a little bit of penetrating fluid, we might be able to get that drain plug out without too much hassle. Right, so let us have a go. So I'm hoping now we have. Oh, oh yeah, it's going, it's going, it's going, it's good. Right, just wind it in a little bit as well. I don't know, I'm a little bit nervous. I don't want to shear it off in there. It's undoing, I think that's good. Actually, you know what, I might just put some glasses on, because you never know where the fuel might splash. Okay, here we go, and try not to get it down my arm. Look at the colour of that, that's horrible. And it really doesn't smell like petrol. It's just kind of really off. quite dull. I keep thinking any second now it's just going to stop. Really thought that was it.
Still going.
Right, so with all of that stale fuel now drained out of our tank, I can actually put the stopper back in before I forget, and then we can top it up with some nice fresh fuel. Now, I've been swapping out stale fuel for good stuff on classic cars for many years, but I've never stopped long enough to do an experiment just to see how impotent stale fuel is when you compare it to fresh-ish fuel. Now, when you think about this, it's got a flash point of about minus 43 degrees Celsius. And what that means is that's the lowest temperature where this liquid can make enough vapours that could ignite. So because we're at sort of room temperature-ish, or cold room temperature, maybe 15 degrees, there should be plenty of vapours coming off our gasoline. But I suspect that there's going to be many more vapours coming off this one, the fresh fuel, compared to the stale fuel. So I have a little experiment in mind. I'm just going to pop some glasses on. I also have a fire extinguisher just in case it all goes out of hand. And I'm doing this here so you don't have to do it at home. So please don't try this at home. I'm just going to pop in our stale fuel from the Land Rover. Just pop in some pretty fresh petrol. Now I'm going to remove these to somewhere safe. And then I've got my little lighters here. Make sure I've got a bit of fire. And the idea is I'm just going to slowly bring these towards the ramekins, and the idea is I think this is going to ignite before the stale fuel does, and probably it's going to burn a little brighter and probably for a little longer. So let's have a go. Aha. There we go, as suspected. So that's very interesting. So it still burns. So that's the thing with stale fuel, you might still get your vehicle to turn over eventually, but clearly with the good stuff, it's going to work much better. And what you can also see is because our stale fuel is also a little bit contaminated, it's leaving more of a sooty deposit around the ramekin compared to the cleaner fuel, which is obviously burning a bit better and making a little bit less smoke. I'm just going to pop in a couple of gallons of finest unleaded fuel. So our battery is nearly fully charged. We've got some fresh fuel. I am itching to hear if this is going to work. Let's crank it over. Right, well, here goes. It's turning over okay. There's no sound of any bangs going on, so let's do one over more. So it's either going to be fuel or spark that's missing. I'll just crank it over one more time. I can't actually hear a fuel pump, and this is a fuel injection, so there should be a high pressure pump spinning away when I first turn on the ignition. So that's a bit interesting. So it would seem that my next job is to investigate the fuel pump, but that is a job for another time. So see you next week.